So Newcastle United's preparations to face Manchester City on Saturday night continue here at the club's North Tyneside HQ. Newcastle looking to retain that place at the top of the Premier League, and Eddie Howe and his players in very confident mood going into this game. The big talking point at the press conference here was the fact that Newcastle on the brink of signing Lewis Hall. Eddie Howe admitting he's a player that he likes and believes he can bring a lot of versatility to the table in a squad that's already looking quite competitive going into that season, which is going to include the 4 competitions, obviously including the Champions League. So Eddie Howe knows that Hall's the type of player that can bring that freshness and ability to rotate the squad moving forward. But overall, Newcastle are in really good fettle going into this game. They hammered Aston Villa last weekend, and they'll be looking to add to that. And the mood's good here. That the Etihad's a place that you've got to go and not always sit back and try and express yourself a little bit, and I think that's what he'll be trying to encourage his players to do. Newcastle were beaten there only 2-0 last season. They haven't won at this venue, so Eddie Howe will be determined to become the first Newcastle manager in the Premier League to win here. Certainly when the transfer window opened for Eddie Howe, I think he would have been pretty happy with the 4 signings that he's got. So Newcastle in a good place, plenty of time in the window remaining, so it hasn't exactly been last gasp for Newcastle. Could they bring in another player? Well, Eddie Howe effectively said they won't today at his press conference, but as we know, that doesn't mean to say that will be the case. And certainly if you go back to the Darren Eales interview last week, he said that they would never shut the door, and they would never say it's shut shop really in any window, because if the right player comes along at the right price who fits the criteria Newcastle are looking for, then there is an opportunity these days for them to make the move. Something which I think fans are probably still getting used to it in some ways. So really, I think if we're being honest, going into this window, it was always going to be about quality rather than quantity, and I think that's exactly what Newcastle have got. They've got certainly two young fullbacks now in Lewis Hall and Tino Livramento that are going to give Newcastle that fresh kind of look in that position. I think if Eddie Howe wants to change things up after Champions League games, he can. He could do it the other way around as well, going into certain games in Europe to give those players that experience. So it's a really exciting time for Newcastle. I asked Eddie Howe at the press conference today whether he felt he was building a team for now, or is he building a team for the future? And he said, to be honest, he said, I'm always going to be looking ahead as well. And basically he feels that it's a work in progress. So Newcastle certainly in a much better position than they were at the end of last season, which bodes well. Obviously finished 4th last year, looking to build on it this year. Eddie Howe wants to just keep things moving steadily along. He was asked today, Eddie Howe, about what position Newcastle United are in. Are they, this team that are challenging for 4th, or can they go one better? Can they almost push Man City to the limit? I guess a lot of those answers will come tomorrow night as Newcastle go to the Etihad Stadium. This is a real chance for them to show that they can live with one of the big boys, if you like. Can they finally win at the Etihad Stadium? That's the question a lot of people are asking. And, based on last week against Aston Villa, then you've got to say they're going to be in with a chance, because Man City are going to be that little bit fatigued from playing in the Super Cup final the other night. So this is an opportunity for Newcastle to, make things difficult. Certainly, if they can stay in the game going in that last half an hour, then I think that's where Man City will feel it the most. But it's always tough there. Pep Guardiola, world-class manager. He'll have his team really fired up for this. They don't need to prove anything to anyone. They run it all, and it's now up to Newcastle to try and catch them up a little bit. I think one thing Eddie Howe will be we'll be looking forward to in many ways is the window shutting, and probably that first international break where he can take stock and basically let things settle down and then focus on the challenge that's ahead for Newcastle this season. So it's been a good window so far, and I think really, if Eddie was honest, he'll say going into that sort of autumn period, it'll be the real acid test for this team, whether they can maintain the standards they've set. There's no reason to think that they can't, of course, because they proved it last season, right across the campaign really, and had that sticky patch in and around the Carabao Cup final. But apart from that, they were as good as anyone. And I think if you take a deeper look into it, I think since Eddie Howe's been in charge, and certainly Newcastle's progress since takeover, I think they've racked up something crazy, like more than 100 points. So they're in a good place going into the new campaign. It's certainly a far cry from previous years where it's just been a case of trying to stay in the Premier League. Newcastle do mean business now, and I think everyone can see that. It's just whether they can, the rate that they are building, it's whether they can just maintain that. Certainly the way Eddie Howe sets up the team and set up the club with that competitive spirit, makes me feel like, it makes me feel confident that they can. They're currently top of the league after one game. I did ask if that was a good habit for Eddie Howe to get into, but he did say that he hasn't really looked at the league table so far, and why would you after one game? No one is going to get carried away. Well, I can get carried away, but it's just great to see Newcastle up there again. I think first time since 2007, so we'll take it even after one game. I'm sure the fans have enjoyed it this week. Can they stay there for one more week or possibly beyond? We'll have to wait and see. But Newcastle fans now looking forward to going to the Etihad. It's normally a tough trip to make. It's not one that people have looked forward to in the past, but this time you do feel that you can go there with a little bit more optimism, and hopefully Newcastle can emerge with something. If they can get a point, I think that'd be a great result. I've seen a few pundits tipping the draw. For me, I'd be happy with a point if you offer me it now, but then you never know. As I say, those tiring Man City legs going into the last half an hour of the game, that could really be an interesting one for them. In terms of selection, I guess the decisions Eddie Howe is probably going to have to make are going to be in his front three. I think he was pretty much answered the question in his press conference, would he stick with the same team? Said he hasn't decided that yet. He's not going to tell the media. He's not going to give Man City an easy team talk and discuss his team selection. So all he said was he's going to have 4 or 5 tricky decisions to make. For me, I think he's probably the decisions he has to make are probably in the front three. There's Miguel Almiron staying there. There's Anthony Gordon staying there, played very well last week, but then Harvey Barnes come off the bench, scored one and made one in 22 minutes. So those are going to be tough calls. Said it was a difficult decision on whether Callum Wilson started or didn't start last week. Obviously came off the bench and got a goal, but was a tough one because he's probably had a very good pre-season in the eyes of Eddie Howe, stayed fit. This is a player who's had injuries in the past, but proven how resilient he can be going into probably the best years of his career now with a quality team around him. So, and he's a player that always gets goals. Told me last season he's probably not going to catch Alan Shearer, but believes he can still get right up there, possibly get the second leading scorer position in Newcastle's Premier League history. We'll have to wait and see if that is the case. So he's going in there with Alexander Isak. He's another quality operator. 1 point was made in the press conference today, £63 million. Looks like an absolute bargain now. Last summer, there was probably eyebrows raised when Newcastle paid that fee to Real Sociedad, but he's certainly proved he's worth the money anyway. And then when you look at the transfer fees we've had this summer at other clubs, then I think that says it all, that Newcastle have got value for money. So, as I say, Newcastle in a good place. Selection, calls left, right and centre for Eddie Howe. He'll be pleased with the way the team is shaping up. For once we go to Man City, Not completely daunting it. Yeah, it'll be tough. Look, Newcastle might get beat, but I think they can go there at least with optimism now, whereas in the past it's just been a foregone conclusion they were going to lose the game. This time it's a bit different. Those records are there to be broken. Newcastle haven't won at the Etihad since Man City moved from Main Road. A lot of us old enough to have gone to Main Road and the Etihad Stadium, so it'd be nice to see Newcastle finally get 3 points at the Etihad Stadium. Okay, I know a few of you will probably be saying we won there in the, I think it was the Capital One Cup, but that was a long time ago as well. So Newcastle, finally, can they do it this weekend? We'll have to wait and see.